Now, the awesomest group of animals is going to be the Chordata. Now, the Chordata is a special group of deuterosomes that have a central support system at the back of their head. That's what differentiates them from the rest of the echinoderms. Now, although you do not see them here, there is another branch of life here because vertebration is not present in all Chordata. Now, all Chordata have a central support system, but not all Chordata have actual vertebra. All right, so all Chordata have something called notochord, though, which is a central support system. They have bodies that usually have heads, and they usually have appendages, although some do not. And most of them have endoskeletons. Those are the vertebrates, which we'll talk about in a second. And this internal skeleton provided them support and great advantages that allow them to actually live in the land without necessarily needing more support. Now, the first groups of animals that actually lived in land were arthropods because they had those exoskeletons. Before that, all the other animals will live pretty much in the water or in moist environments. Some mollusks actually live on land. Those snails, that, or with or without the shells, you have the snails that live on land, but that's the minority. The first large groups of animals to actually take over the land were going to be the Chordata. But the first Chordata were going to be water Chordata. And the two examples are tunicates and lanceolates. Now, tunicates and lanceolates are the examples of invertebrate Chordata. They have notochords, but they have no vertebrae. They just have a basically central support system, but they don't really have any kind of bonage or any kind of cartilage to actually support them. It's just a central support tissue system. And they have a nerve net that runs across the middle of their bodies. And all of the Chordata, of course, will have bilateral symmetry. Now, the first group of Chordata is going to be the fish. Now, the fish are going to be the first group of true vertebrate Chordata. And before we talked about that, I wanted to clarify one major other criteria that differentiates between animal groups. Some of the Chordata are going to be endotherms, and the other one are going to be ectotherms. Endotherms are warm-blooded animals. That means they actually regulate their internal temperature, and they can control that by increasing or decreasing their metabolism, sweating, and other things like that. So increasing their heart rate and other things like that. And so they will maintain their temperature despite what the environment does. But ectotherms will be cold-blooded, and they'll have a body temperature that changes with the environment. So they have to live in environments that maintain a certain temperature in order for them to survive. All animals are going to be ectotherms with the exception of birds and mammals, which we'll talk about at the very end of this. All right? So the first group of actual vertebrates are going to be the jawless fish. Now, they have vertebrates, but they have no jaws. An example of that is the sea lamprey. They live attached to other stuff, so a lot of them are actually parasites, all right? And they kind of suck fluids from and filter feed from that. They have no appendages, which is actually just same thing as lanceolates and tunicates. It's the exception to the rule of not having these appendages. They don't have, the side fins to swim with. They just basically have flexible skeletons made of cartilage that they can flap around and make them swim in the water. And they are ectotherms like the rest of the other vertebrates. Now, they also have the bony fish next. Now, the bony fish, the first type of bony fish is actually called cartilaginous fish. They don't actually have bones. They have cartilages and great support systems throughout the entire body, and they will actually have jaws. The first types of this are going to be the sharks, the rays, and the skates. And they have very advanced gill mechanisms. They're going to be ectoderms, though, and they have very strong teeth. And some of them have even cool systems like, electromagnetic detection and chemical detection systems, which are very, very advanced. But they do have full skeletons made of cartilage, though, no bones. All right? And some of them must continuously swim to survive, but others actually have systems on their gills that can flap their gills in order to make them be able to not need to swim constantly in order to survive. Even sharks, some sharks have that system. Now, then you have the bony fish, which all are able to actually have that system that they don't need necessarily to swim the whole time. But that includes all the kinds of fish you can think of: flounder, eels, trouts, and other fish, including saltwater and freshwater fish. They have actual skeletons made out of bones. Very advanced skills, and they have stream-like bodies, usually narrow in shape, and most of them are going to be the most numerous groups of fish that you see. And the fact that they have skeleton bones gives them a great advantage at surviving predators and swimming faster, which allow them to survive better on the water than other kinds of fish. Now, from this group of bony fish, you have two major groups of fish, including the rayfine and skinfine fish. And from some of those, you're going to have something called lungfish. And from the lungfish is the fish that can actually breathe without gills. They have to go to the surface to breathe. And from those lungfish, we think the actual land-living animals actually came from, other than the arthropods and the mollusca. All right, and that's from which the next group of animals is going to evolve. So from the bony fish that have lungs, you're going to have the evolution of amphibians, which is the next great group of animals. Now, amphibians are going to be the ones that actually live part of their lives in the water and part of their lives in the land. And they're also ectotherms, so they cannot regulate their internal temperature. And that includes things like toads, frogs, and salamanders, and newts. Now, some of these amphibians will have 4 legs, and some of them will not. So 4 legs is not a characteristic of all amphibians, but most will have smooth, moist skin. And while they live in the water, they will breathe with gills, but then when they live in the land, they will go to the metamorphosis and develop lungs. And so that's a very interesting type of organism. By the way, amphibians are the group that's most sensitive to environmental changes. And a lot of them are disappearing from the earth as the global warming and great deforestation and habitat destruction happens because of human interference. So the amphibians are disappearing because of that. And that's very important because they have a really important niche. They're the bottom of the food chain in a lot of ecosystems on the land. So it's going to be very, very bad if they all disappear. Now, from the amphibians that are actually have legs, for example, frogs, a special group of vertebrates evolved, which we'll call tetrapods, which are groups of organisms that have 4 legs. Now, this will be the reptiles, okay? So reptiles are adapted to live on land. They're terrestrial animals. Although there were some reptiles that swam in the like sauropods, the majority of them actually live on the land, okay? And they breed with lungs. They have lungs, and that means that these are the ones that lived on the water had to have lungs in order to survive. And that's, by the way, the ones that live in the water evolved from ones that lived at the end, okay? And that, most of them went away by the time that the dinosaurs went extinct at the end of the Cenozoic era. By the way, we didn't really talk about timing of this evolutionary process. We'll talk about that in the end of this video. But anyways, they have bodies covered with plates or scales in order to protect them from water loss and from the heat of the environment, and that allows them to live in drier land and then spread them throughout the land. You see, the amphibians have to be close to the water. They have to have moist skin. But the reptiles have an advantage of not being able of having that protection, so that allows them to dominate over the land, and from thousands and thousands of these, reptiles will dominate over the land. And so those are what we call the ectotherms. All right, they're also don't regulate their temperature, and you see the reptiles going to the light or to the shade depending on what they need to do, just like the amphibians and the other kinds of animals. And they're going to be reptiles. Now, a special group of reptiles are actually going to have what we call amniotic eggs, and that's going to include the groups which include the turtle, the snakes, the crocodiles, lizards, dinosaurs, birds, and even the mammals. That's right. We evolved from the ancient reptiles. But a special group of reptiles are called amniotes. They have amniotic eggs. That means they have eggs which have 3 layers of protection. They have the corae on the outside, and then they have a liquidly thing that helps to support and feed the embryo that's growing, and then they have the amnion, which is another layer of protection, and then they have the embryo on the inside of that. So not all reptiles are like that, but most of the modern reptiles and the animals that came from them are going to be amniotes, okay? Now, one group of reptiles is actually the dinosaurs, and they came from ancient reptiles from which the birds actually came from as well. Mammals, however, came from another group of reptiles, and another group of reptiles even includes the snakes and turtles, okay, and lizards. But crocodiles, alligators, dinosaurs, and birds came from one group of reptiles. So let's do a little tree here to actually show what I mean here. All right, so you have the first original reptile, which was a tetrapod, right? And then the amniotic egg developed, all right? So you have the ones that don't have the amniotic egg and the ones that do have the amniotic egg. Then you have 3 major groups that are going to split from this. One is going to become the mammals of today, okay? The other ones are going to become the other reptiles, okay? Now, from those other reptiles, you have the ones which are the modern reptiles, which include turtles, snakes, and lizards, all right? From the other group, you're going to have other reptiles like crocodiles and alligators, all right? And from that group, you're going to get some dinosaurs, all right? And from the group that comes from the dinosaurs, you're going to have the modern birds. So you see how the reptiles split throughout their life. So from the ancient reptile to today, that's kind of how it splits. But the interesting thing about these kinds of reptiles is that they lay eggs in a leathery shell, not a hard shell, okay? So these are kinds of reptiles that have occupied the world. Another special group of reptiles that includes crocodiles and the birds have bodies adapted to actually lay hard shells. But birds took it a step further, and they actually have bodies adapted for flight. They have light bones, they have feathers, and they have wings, which allow them to fly. Now, some dinosaurs show evidence of having wings and light bones, so that's why we think that that birds came from ancient dinosaurs. Now, or from groups from which the dinosaurs came from. Now, they have scaly legs and feet, just like the other reptiles have, but the bodies are covered with wings. And they lay their eggs in hard shells like the crocodiles and other kinds of dinosaurs do. But the birds have an advancement that's peculiar, that it happened at the same time in birds and in mammals. They are the first types of animals that are going to be endotherms. They regulate their internal temperature. By the way, birds actually evolved after animals on the branch of life. Animals evolved from an early reptile branch, so that mammals have been around for longer than the birds have been around. So let's talk about those too. Mammals are a special group of reptiles that have advanced nervous systems and highly developed brains. They're also all endotherms, and most of them have very hairy bodies, although some of them develop bodies that developed away with the hair. But the majority of them have some hair, at least during their fetal stages. Now, they occupy several habitats throughout the earth. And they always give birth to live young. That means that you don't have eggs. Well, you have eggs, but their eggs are inside, connected to them through a placenta, with the exception of the platypus, which is a weird kind of mammal. All right, but they have this placenta which connects them to the live birth. Now, some mammals actually stay connected after they're born. They're called marsupials, and they stay in the pouch in the mom. Others are actually free-moving, but all mammals will actually feed off their mothers at the beginning of their lives with things which we call mammary glands. And the cool thing about it, that's why the platypus is a mammal, by the way, because even though he has an egg that he lays, he has mammary glands to feed their young at the beginning of their life. So this is just a weird kind of mammal that it kind of evolved a hard shell instead of evolving from the rounded one. So it's kind of like a convergent evolution. They got the hard shell that the birds got, even though all the other mammals came from development of the internal living systems. But anyways, it's weird. It's almost like mammals have these parasitic babies, you know. They live parasitically inside of them for months, and then they are born and they still be parasites and feed off the mother. But the advantage is that you don't have to actually leave the eggs and protect them. You protect yourself because they're attached to you. So as long as you protect you'll be fine. And then once they're born, they will stay close to you. They don't have to stay at the nest. That's a great advantage that the mammals have, and that's why they roll on to develop the highly advanced systems that made mammals one of the most advanced types of animals that there are.